Nightly greetings, one and all. William Theo here, homegrown and happy to bring you PTV News Now. Tonight, we begin with the auspicious occasion celebrating the birth of a nation, all 126 years of it, and the president leading solemn ceremonies in the morning and then later on at the People's Palace with a diplomatic corps as his guests. After leading government and the entire nation in celebrating the 126th celebration of the country's independence in a solemn ceremony at the Rizal Park and Shrine early this morning, President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. played host to the second of the biannual Vin d'Honneur socials at the People's Palace for the diplomatic corps. The President and the First Lady welcomed each envoy and special diplomatic representatives of the United Nations and countries the Philippines has foreign relations with. Each diplomat was greeted cordially by the President and First Lady, with some getting extended time in chit-chat, especially the UN representatives and envoys representing the nations the President visited in his working and state visits. One could only imagine being a fly on the wall and eavesdropping on this brief chats between the President and his guest, especially with His Excellency Huang Xilian from the Great People's Republic of China. Many of them wore the country's formal wear, the Barong Tagalog and Terno, as their gesture of respect to their hosts. The President in his speech made clear his government's policy decisions are rooted in the best interest of the country and the promotion of peace while engaging more like-minded nations with mutual interests and values. In his response and message, the Vatican's papal nuncio to the Philippines, Ambassador/Archbishop Charles John Brown, extended his congratulations to the Philippine government and to the President for its successful peace and development crusade in the Bangsamoro region. He implored his audience and peers towards diplomacy and dialogue in dealing with world conflicts and geopolitical issues, much like how the country got past its long-standing conflict in Muslim Mindanao by way of creating the Bangsamoro region and engaging in dialogue. The Vin d'Honneur is held twice a year and hosted by the President and First Lady on New Year's Day and on Independence Day, June 12, to honor diplomatic corps. Meanwhile, seeing the worsening plight and dire need for humanitarian aid in Gaza, U.S. Secretary Antony Blinken vowed more relief assistance for the Palestinians hours before Hamas issued its statement supporting a United Nations truce deal. VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb tells us more.
As the U.S. delivers new aid into Gaza, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced more than $400 million in additional humanitarian relief for Palestinians.
Let's work together to ensure that more aid gets into Gaza and, once it's in Gaza, reaches the people who need it the most.
Hamas says it wants amendments to a U.S.-backed ceasefire plan that, among other points, exchanges Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners.
We're working every minute to bring everyone home.
Hours after Blinken met in Tel Aviv with family members of hostages still held by Hamas.
They were elated at the rescue of 4 hostages just a couple of days ago, but they continue to feel deeply, powerfully, this enduring separation from their loved ones.
The UN Human Rights Office said Tuesday both sides may have committed war crimes in connection with the raid that brought the hostages home. Gaza's health ministry, which does not distinguish between civilians and combatants, says more than 200 Palestinians were killed during the rescue. Hamas held the hostages in 2 apartment buildings. The operation required support from Israeli airstrikes. Retired General Frank McKenzie, the former head of U.S. Central Command and the author of the new book, The Melting Point, tells VOA Hamas's use of human shields has complicated Israeli operations.
I think they've been a little less successful getting after senior Hamas leadership because they've chosen to hide even while their fighters fight. And I'm sure they're hidden deep underground, protected by Israeli hostages. And of course, the real hostages in Gaza not just the Israeli hostages, but the population of Gaza itself, which Hamas has no interest in moving out of the line of fire.
Is Israel's battle against Hamas winnable?
It's winnable if they can fashion a way to a day after that makes sense. But you've got to ensure that Hamas is not part of that equation. I'm intensely sympathetic to the Israeli view that you have to eliminate Hamas. At the same time, I think it's a very high bar to say that you're going to get rid of all of Hamas because it's a revolutionary movement. If you kill 99 Hamas fighters, the 100th fighter is going to raise a bloody hand and declare the revolution.
He envisions an Arab-led force from neighboring nations to help keep the peace in the Strip once fighting is finished. And a true win for Israel and the Palestinians, he says, requires more global investment to allow Gaza to rebuild. Carla Babb, VOA News, Washington.
When the richest 7 nations on the planet gather this week for their annual G7 huddle, U.S. President Joe Biden will urge all G7 members to cash in on Russia's frozen assets to bankroll Ukraine's sustained defense against the former Soviet Union's armed attacks. In addition, Biden will urge all to come together to tackle infrastructure spending, development of AI, and Chinese overcapacity in green technologies. VOA's White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports on a trending right-wing shift in the EU political landscape that may get in the way of Biden's plans.
As Russian forces advance on the battlefield in Ukraine and war funding fatigue settles more deeply among American and European taxpayers, the U.S. wants the group of 7 leading industrialized nations to provide Kyiv with a $50 billion loan to be paid back using interest from the approximately $280 billion in Russian assets immobilized in Western financial institutions. President Joe Biden spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Paris last week.
The United States is standing with you. You are the bulwark against the aggression that's taking place.
Having quadrupled tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and other key sectors last month, Biden now wants the G7 to confront Beijing's practice of flooding global markets with cheap exports in those industries.
It's critical that we and the growing number of countries who have identified this as a concern present a clear and united front.
However, far-right parties' gains in European Parliament elections over the weekend have weakened French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, adding uncertainty to the G7's posture on Russia and China. Ursula von der Leyen is fighting to remain European Commission president for another term. If she succeeds, Europe is expected to remain strong on Russia and China.
But the wild card really are the French elections here, the snap elections that Emmanuel Macron has announced after his defeat in the European parliamentary elections. If the far right gets into government in France, then we will have trouble not only on Ukraine support, but also on the China front.
G7 host Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has invited Pope Francis to highlight the Rome call for AI ethics, urging governments and companies to follow ethical principles for AI. Curbing migration to Europe by investing in Africa is another key theme of Meloni's G7 presidency. The initiative aligns with the G7's Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, whose goal is to mobilize $600 billion in private infrastructure funding by 2027 as an alternative to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Meloni's far-right Brothers of Italy party victory in the European parliamentary election has consolidated her power.
I'm proud that this nation presents itself at the G7 in Europe with the strongest government of all.
Biden leaves for Italy on Wednesday, a day after his son Hunter Biden was found guilty on federal charges of obtaining a gun in 2018 while addicted to drugs. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
And that is a wrap for tonight's news updates. We look forward to you joining us anew tomorrow, same time, same location on your remote and browser for the hottest events breaking here and abroad. William Theo here reminding you to always work hard and stay connected by catching the news right here. A cooler and more restful night ahead, all of you.